Imagine your family group chat planning a massive road trip. Half the cousins show up wielding pitchforks, while the other half bring Tupperware like it's a potluck. That's basically how the First Crusade kicked off. Legend has it, Europe hit pause on its endless squabbles in 1096 for one grand noble quest. Yet the idea of a smooth, perfectly coordinated march of Christian unity, as off course as a GPS on a bad day. Back then, the Christian world was more like a medieval Tower of Babel. Everyone spoke different languages, followed rival leaders, and cherished discord like a family heirloom. European nobles rolled up with ragtag armies, each convinced theirs was the VIP squad. The church bigwigs, Rome, Constantinople, and the rest, couldn't even agree on a group chat name, let alone a battle plan. If the Crusaders were any more disorganized, they'd have arrived in Jerusalem using upside-down maps. Their idea of mission unity? Arguing over which playlist to blast during the journey. Yet somehow, despite more splinter groups than a hipster coffee shop's milk fridge, enough managed to stumble through and leave a seriously tangled legacy. So next time someone says Crusader solidarity, just picture your cousins arm wrestling in the back seat over snacks. However, the motivations for joining the Crusades were more complex than just religious devotion. Imagine hordes of medieval folks seizing swords, not for a TikTok dance, but for God's glory. The Crusades. Legend paints Crusaders as spotless saints, halos shining, laser-focused on Jerusalem and salvation. After all, Pope Urban II's 1095 pitch was the original spiritual infomercial. Sin scrubbed clean, exotic travel perks, and maybe a few gilded souvenirs. But let's be real, salvation wasn't everyone's sole carry-on. Many packed chainmail with more earthly interests, land grabs, plunder, power plays, or dodging persistent debt collectors back home. Ambitious nobles eyed foreign real estate, and fewer in-laws at the next family reunion, while mercenaries saw a medieval career switch, crusading for coin. Peasants jumped in to escape grumpy feudal lords, and a handful heard crusade and thought, road trip? Count me in! Bonus perks included. In the end, the Crusades were less about pure piety and more like medieval networking. Think LinkedIn, but with sharper swords. Motivations? A glorious jumble of faith, fortune, family drama, and a hefty dose of FOMO. Moreover, the composition of the crusading forces was not limited to armored knights on horseback. Picture a glittering parade of armored knights thundering across the desert, lances gleaming like the world's angriest Renaissance fair. If you've ever watched a Hollywood crusade, you'd expect nothing less. Endless rows of helmeted hunks galloping at breakneck speed on horses that put race cars to shame. But buckle up. That's about as accurate as imagining your next road trip as a Fast and Furious blockbuster. The reality? Crusading armies were as uniform as a flea market on Saturday. Only a modest handful could claim the full knightly getup. The rest? A ragtag mix of foot soldiers, archers whose aim was more oops than bullseye, devout but penniless pilgrims, and folks who probably borrowed their armor from the local cookware aisle. Sure, a knight's shining armor dazzled, but so did a peasant in 3 layers of rusty mail and grandma's old stew pot strapped to their head. And the horses? Think fewer noble steeds, more tragic tales of medieval livestock. So yes, Crusader armies were less equestrian parade and more Game of Thrones extras on a bad hair day, proving that Crusade fashion was less runway ready and more how not to get skewered or well done. In fact, medieval Europeans had some prior contact with Muslim peoples before the Crusades began. Think medieval Europeans met their first Muslims in Jerusalem with wide eyes and open jaws? Think again. History had already RSVP'd to that awkward meet and greet centuries earlier. If ignorance is bliss, medieval Europeans must have been chronically depressed because they were anything but clueless about their Muslim neighbors. Their worlds had already collided in a flavorful mashup of culture, conflict, and commerce across Spain, Sicily, and southern Italy. When Muslims swept into Iberia in the 8th century like a historical tsunami, Christians and Muslims found themselves locked in what might be history's longest and spiciest roommate agreement. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire wasn't just idly flipping through prayer books. They were busy juggling treaties, battles, and bustling bazaars with Muslim powers since Islam's infancy. Even Vikings, the original gap-year globetrotters, raided Islamic lands and traded everything from furs to slaves, though they wisely left the camels out of it. Forget first contact. Think of the Crusades more like that explosive family reunion where frenemies finally swapped insults for swords. This interaction challenges the notion that Crusaders solely brought civilization to the Middle East. Picture knights in shiny armor charging into the desert, convinced they're about to introduce forks, table manners, and civilization to the locals. Spoiler alert, the locals already had cities. No jousting 101 required. The popular myth casts Crusaders as enlightened saviors dropping order into a backward land. Reality check? Middle Eastern civilizations were already in their golden age, crushing it in math, astronomy, philosophy, and city planning, while Europe was still busy losing track of its own plagues. Europeans arrived expecting to wow the locals, only to find bustling cities with paved streets, hospitals, and, hold on to your helmets, running water. Crusaders thought they'd discovered new worlds. Instead, they discovered soap. The real plot twist: many Crusaders started copying local customs. Picture a French knight asking, "Wait, you bathe regularly?" Far from civilizing, they mostly disrupted thriving societies. And when it came to learning, European scholars were the ones borrowing from Islamic libraries. Plumbing envy is real. And spoiler alert, the true civilizing went the other way. Among the famous figures of the Crusades were Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, whose encounters have often been dramatized. Picture this: two medieval superstars, swords drawn, glaring across a sand-swept battlefield. Richard the Lionheart versus Saladin. A duel for the ages, right? After all, everyone knows these two were bitter enemies, locked in a personal grudge match as fierce as any daytime TV family feud. Hollywood has us picturing them perpetually seconds away from a dramatic face-off. Swords clashing, egos bruising, and hair so iconic it practically needed its own coat of arms. But here's the plot twist nobody asked for. Richard and Saladin never actually met face-to-face. That's right, these arch-enemies had about as much in-person time as rival CEOs stuck on a marathon conference call. Their rivalry was more of a chess match than a brawl. Armies maneuvering, diplomatic messages flying, the only clashing was between their clerks signing treaties. And those famous confrontations? More like gift exchanges, horses, fruit, mutual respect. They swapped more presents than your office Secret Santa. The real battle? Probably over who had the best hair conditioner under chainmail. Turns out, the legend of their fiery rivalry grew in the retelling, not the reality. A medieval myth gone viral centuries before viral was even a thing. Alongside these legendary leaders, many believed that participating in the Crusades guaranteed a place in heaven. Crusaders, charging toward Jerusalem with a sword in one hand and a VIP ticket to heaven in the other. Back then, popular wisdom pitched crusading as the ultimate spiritual coupon. Buy one pilgrimage, get a lifetime of sins erased free. Pope Urban II's 1095 pep rally promised remission of sins to anyone who joined the First Crusade. Suddenly, the faithful imagined skipping past purgatory like cruising the HOV lane straight to heavenly bliss. But hold your holy horses. Church policies on indulgences were more tangled than a saint's hair shirt. Eternal rewards sometimes demanded actual confession, penance, and gasp, not acting like a pirate on tour. Not all clergy were sold either. Some worried sainthood would turn into a group discount and crusading into a medieval Black Friday stampede for salvation. Grab yours while supplies and limbs last. In truth, many crusaders still fretted over their spiritual ledgers. Turns out, flashing a crusader's sword at the pearly gates bouncer wasn't an express pass. Faith, it seems, was never quite that easy. Yet, despite these beliefs, the crusaders did not all speak the same language. Picture this: thousands of sweaty, armored Europeans marching to the Holy Land, all chatting away in perfect harmony, like a medieval United Nations, but with more chainmail and fewer translators. Legend has it that crusaders strolled along, swapping battle plans and bread with ease, united by one magical language. If only. If everyone truly understood each other, the Crusades might have wrapped up in a day, most likely at the first conveniently located tavern. In reality, Europe's armies were a clanging, stomping babel of Old French, German, Italian, English, and Basque. Latin ruled the paperwork and churchly affairs, but most knights and foot soldiers blundered bravely through a minefield of misunderstood slang. Forget secret codes. Simply being understood was the ultimate encryption. Orders got mangled, insults flew, sometimes by accident, and a few clever souls cooked up pidgin dialects paired with gestures worthy of a charades champ. Unsung translators kept the battlefield from descending into an endless game of who's on first, a gig where job security only soared with every misheard lunch order that accidentally declared war. Furthermore, their conduct in battle was not always guided by honor and chivalry. When people hear Crusader, they picture a knight galloping into battle, sword gleaming, virtue glowing brighter than his polished armor. The popular myth paints Crusaders as paragons of honor and chivalry, riding forth to defend the faith and maybe rescue a damsel in distress, ideally while quoting a bit of poetry. Thank medieval romance writers for turbocharging the image of the noble knight. Apparently, every tournament was half holy war, half bachelor episode, with roses optional. Reality check. Crusading chronicles are less King Arthur and more Game of Thrones with chainmail. These not-so-gentlemen raided, pillaged, and occasionally stabbed each other, sometimes for glory, often for loot, and occasionally, according to some chronicles, just to cure boredom. Do unto others wasn't exactly in the Crusader rulebook, unless others meant your own wallet. Honor? Well, tell that to the folks in Jerusalem or Constantinople, where knightly hospitality usually came at the pointy end of a sword. Chivalry might have been alive, but it was frequently out to lunch when the loot wagons rolled by. In short, if these Crusaders were models of virtue, then my cat is clearly the reincarnation of Gandhi. So next time someone invokes the chivalrous Crusader, remember, that halo? Probably just the reflection off a polished sword. This contrast is highlighted by events such as the Fourth Crusade's controversial march. Picture this, an army of Crusaders, armor polished to a mirror shine, banners snapping heroically in the wind, all ready to make history, while desperately trying to read a non-existent Google Maps. Their grand destination? Jerusalem. Their battle cry? What could possibly go wrong? Spoiler alert? Everything. Legend paints these warriors as united souls, fueled purely by faith and an all-inclusive pilgrimage spirit. The reality? More like a high school senior trip with swords and way worse navigation. Upon hitting Venice, the Crusaders faced the ultimate budget shock. They'd booked way more ships than their coin purses allowed. The Venetians, champions of capitalism, dismissed their offers of exposure and counter-offered a deal straight out of an influencer's nightmare. Want a ride? Help us pillage some fellow Christian cities. Suddenly, the GPS rerouted from J for Jerusalem to Z for Zara, eventually landing on C for Constantinople, because who can resist Byzantine bling? Bethlehem got snubbed. But hey, at least the Crusaders walked away with more loot than holy landmarks. Detours taken, 5. Saints earned, 0. In addition, the Muslim forces opposing the Crusaders were not always united. Imagine a world where your group chat actually agrees on one dinner spot. Now stretch that fantasy to medieval Muslim armies wrangling over how to handle the Crusaders. Sounds impossible? Spoiler, it basically was. Legend paints the Islamic world during the Crusades as one unstoppable juggernaut. The reality? More like a medieval boardroom brawl featuring the Fatimids, Seljuks, and Zengids, each convinced the others had lost their minds. These dynasties squabbled more fiercely than college roommates battling over the thermostat. Seamless teamwork? Forget it. Political backstabbing and territorial spats stole the spotlight from any so-called religious unity. While Crusaders took a casual stroll through the Levant, power struggles raged behind the scenes. The Fatimids, ever the pragmatists, even struck deals with Crusaders to sideline rival Muslims. True unity was less a given and more a mythical unicorn, only glimpsed after decades of reluctant alliances, double crosses, and, let's be honest, enough coffee to fuel a small army. If you think corralling your family for a reunion is tough, try managing caffeinated cats who can't even settle on what day it is. Similarly, the Crusader castles were not always the impenetrable fortresses they are thought to be. If you think Crusader castles were the medieval equivalent of uncrackable passwords, History's got a plot twist for you. Legends crown these fortresses as invincible, shrugging off sieges like a knight dodging a salad bar, utterly unimpressed. But in reality, Crusader castles were impressive, much like pecs in chainmail. Undeniably brawny, but far from bulletproof. Siege tech was the medieval version of update now or perish, from trebuchets tossing masonry like angry toddlers with a vendetta, to sappers tunneling beneath thick walls, or simply outlasting defenders until hunger became the real winner. And plenty of these so-called strongholds tumbled, despite their ironclad reputations. Crac des Chevaliers and Carac? Legendary, yes, but they changed hands more often than a used helmet at a bargain armory. Castle architects dreamed of impenetrability, but attackers always had a bigger rock, or at least a Dickens of a trick up their sleeve. In short, if Crusader castles were grand promises, they definitely owed more than a few refunds. Mysteries and legends, such as those surrounding the Templar Knights and their supposed secret treasures, add to the Crusades' complex history. Picture armored knights, glowing relics in hand, marching out of a secret vault like medieval Indiana Jones, if Indy ditched his whip for a bewilderingly complex ledger. For centuries, the legendary Knights Templar have been cast as brooding guardians of the Holy Grail and shadowy curators of mysterious relics. Legend has it their secrets ran so deep, even their grocery lists needed papal approval. But how did a band of battle-hardened monks become the Beyoncé of conspiracy theories? Blame their cocktail of battlefield valor, quirky rituals, and a knack for medieval crowdfunding. In truth, the Templars mostly safeguarded pilgrims and managed enormous financial transactions. Sorry to pop the bubble, but their most priceless artifact was probably a deluxe chest full of IOUs. Holy Grail? More like holy paperwork. Their greatest lost secret might have been a recipe for medieval deodorant, now vanished into history's attic. Their banking system made them the medieval Western Union, which, ironically, is less Da Vinci Code afterparty and more accountants-only mixer. After a papal smackdown and some creative coercion, rumors exploded. Hidden treasure. But if you want secret knowledge, check their balance sheets, not their dungeons. If the Templars had Netflix, Secrets of Our Treasure Room would have been canceled after the pilot. Despite some myths, Crusaders did not universally neglect personal hygiene practices. Imagine charging into battle clad in armor and sword, and smelling like a biohazard. Forget holy water. What Crusaders really needed was holy deodorant. The popular myth paints medieval knights as grime-loving germaphobes, convinced only a filthy knight was a faithful knight. But in reality, Crusaders took personal hygiene almost as seriously as their crusading missions. Public bathhouses thrived all over Europe and the Middle East, sometimes outclassing modern spas. Just with more lye and less lavender. Knights proudly flaunted their courteous cleanliness to charm locals, because let's face it, nothing seals an alliance like a guy who doesn't smell like he wrestled a sewage dragon. Even on the road, they lugged combs, razors, and nail cleaners, medieval toiletry kits minus the travel-size toothpaste. Still, soap and bathhouses couldn't keep lice from staging daily rebellions on every Crusader's scalp. With all that armor, the real miracle was that they didn't pass out from each other's stench. Cleaning up wasn't just about repentance, it was about social survival. And maybe a tiny dash of self-respect. Moreover, not every crusade was officially sanctioned by the Pope. If you think every crusade came with a shiny papal seal, think again. Some were more spray and pray than Holy See. The popular image: every crusader marched off clutching the Pope's autograph in one hand and a holy sword in the other. Sure, the First Crusade did kick off with Urban II's big papal bull, promising glory, God, and let's be honest, some seriously desirable Mediterranean real estate. But not every holy expedition came with its paperwork in order. Enter the so-called popular crusades. Bands like the People's Crusade and the utterly paperwork-free Children's Crusade. These folks weren't fueled by papal blessings, but by pure adrenaline, and a remarkable talent for forging their own permission slips, hoping no one checked signatures at Jerusalem's gates. Meanwhile, ambitious nobles and impromptu leaders jumped on the bandwagon, slapping divine approval on their banners before the Vatican could even locate its papal stamp. Frequently delayed, occasionally lost in the medieval postal labyrinth. The line between official and unofficial crusades? About as wobbly as a drawbridge after one too many mugs of mead. So remember, in the age of crusading, fake it till you sanctify it was not just a motto, it was a lifestyle. Consequently, the Crusades did not conclude with a clear-cut victory or defeat for the Christian forces. History class sold us the Crusades like a sports final, complete with a scoreboard flashing Team Christian versus Team Muslim. But was it really that tidy? Enter the myth. A king waves his elaborate feathered hat, swords are sheathed, and everyone heads home for good. In reality, the Crusades were the proto-Netflix miniseries, multiple seasons, countless plot twists, and zero closure. Instead of a neat finale, we got centuries of holy road trips. Some Crusader states stuck around like that half-forgotten library card you never tossed. Depending on which medieval scribe you side with, everyone was winning at some point, right before the next spectacular defeat. The Grand Curtain Call, the fall of Acre in 1291, just meant no more uniformed knights playing tourist in the Holy Land. But minor skirmishes, shaky treaties, and passive-aggressive letters kept the drama alive. If you're tallying at home, the Crusades' final score reads, shrug emoji. Modern historians argue fiercely, but mostly agree. It's less the end, and more to be continued.